They say love requires sacrifice, but I didn't think mine would come with stitches. When I woke up in that windowless room with a needle in my arm and pain splitting through my side, I already knew what he'd done. I didn't need a doctor. I didn't need a chart. I didn't need David standing there with his guilty hands shoved deep into his pockets. I could feel it in my bones, what was missing, what he took. My kidney. Gone. Given to Barbara. The woman who once sipped cocktails in our apartment and called me his little helper like I was his assistant. Not the woman who held him up when the world wanted to watch him fail. The woman whose voice dripped sugar when I brought her soup the day she fainted at that fundraiser. The woman he used to hate, or so he said, but apparently dying changes everything. He whispered something when I asked why, said she was fading, said no one else matched, said it was the only way. And somehow, in his twisted mind, stealing part of me while I slept was an act of mercy. I was the one who had shared his dream. I stayed when the rent was overdue. I stayed when investors ghosted us. I stayed when his hands shook and his pride cracked and he cried into my chest at 3 a.m. whispering, "I don't want to fail." I gave him everything. He gave her me. And when the nurses wheeled me out and the sedatives wore off, I realized what else was gone. My ring. The one he gave me when we still believed in forever. The one he said symbolized us against the world. Gone. Like it had never meant anything at all. He didn't even have the guts to say goodbye. He took my kidney, and then he took my life with it. So when I woke up again, in that tiny bed in our old apartment, sunlight pouring in like the universe had hit rewind, I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I smiled. Because this time, David wouldn't just lose me. He'd beg to survive me. David was the kind of man people followed without knowing why. He had that thing, some strange mix of brilliance and arrogance that made you want to believe him, even when your gut whispered you shouldn't. He wasn't rich when I met him. He wasn't even close. He was broke, scruffy, surviving on borrowed time and instant noodles. But his eyes, they burned with ambition. That was what pulled me in. That fire, that madness. I was working a basic admin job back then, filing papers, scheduling meetings, pretending the endless buzzing of office phones didn't feel like slow death. He came in to pitch some absurd idea to my boss, something about disrupting the medical device industry by reinventing home dialysis. Everyone rolled their eyes. He walked out empty-handed. I followed him. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he clenched his jaw when they laughed. Maybe it was the way he held his folder like it was his life. I found him outside by the vending machine, kicking it because it ate his last dollar. I bought him a soda and asked him to tell me about the idea. He talked for hours. Not just about the tech, but about the people it would save. About how dialysis patients spend half their lives attached to cold, impersonal machines. How he'd watched his uncle wither away because there wasn't a better option. He talked like he'd already changed the world and just needed time for the rest of us to catch up. And I was hooked. We started seeing each other after that. First it was coffee, then it was weekends, then I moved him into my apartment because his landlord raised the rent and he couldn't keep up with it. I let him take over my kitchen table with his sketches and parts. I cleared my closet so he could store prototypes. He called me his muse, his anchor, his partner in revolution. "Pam, when this thing takes off, we're going to live like royalty," he'd say, his hands wrapped around mine like a promise. No more clocking in, no more begging, just freedom. I believed him. I gave up my job 6 months later. I told my mom it was for love. She told me love didn't pay rent. I told her she didn't understand him. She said that's what she used to say about my dad. Still, I stayed. I helped him file patents. I built his website from scratch. I handled customer feedback when our first test group complained that the interface was buggy. I ran point on marketing, pitched to health blogs, called in favors from friends in the medtech scene. When we got a tiny investor to bite, a woman named Barbara, who wore designer heels to our garage workspace, I told David we made it. We celebrated with takeout sushi and sparkling water. Barbara didn't like me. Not outright, but in the way women can pretend not to notice you while making sure you feel 3 inches tall. She'd talk over me, praise David for ideas I planted, roll her eyes when I wore jeans to meetings, but she signed the checks, so I smiled. I bit my tongue. I told myself we were on the same team. I told myself she didn't matter. David said she didn't either. She's just money, Pam. I say, kissing my forehead. The heart of this company is you. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. So I ignored the late nights, the lingering looks, the new clothes and cologne, and the way his phone suddenly lived face down. I ignored how he stopped saying we and started saying I. I ignored it all because I remembered the man with nothing but fire in his chest and nowhere to go. I remembered who we used to be. It wasn't always perfect. We fought, sometimes bad. But every time I packed a bag, he'd say the same thing. You're the only one who's ever believed in me. So I'd stay. Because who was I if I wasn't the woman who kept believing? When Barbara collapsed at an industry dinner, I rushed to her side before he did. She was pale, sweating, barely able to breathe. The hospital said it was her kidneys, some rare genetic failure. She needed constant treatment, maybe a transplant. David barely slept after that. He was there every day, researching, calling doctors, asking questions. I didn't question it. I thought it was compassion. I thought it was guilt. I never thought it was love. He came home one night with tears in his eyes, said she didn't have long, said there wasn't a donor match, said it was tearing him apart. I wrapped my arms around him, told him we'd figure something out, told him medicine moved fast, that there were registries, hope. He nodded, held me like I was everything. Then he cooked for me. David never cooked. The man once burned frozen pizza. But that night he made scallops, garlic risotto, even dessert. He poured wine, lit candles, told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I laughed. Called him dramatic. That night, I blacked out. I woke up in a room that wasn't ours, in a body that didn't feel whole. The pain was sharp. My side ached with a deep, wrong kind of hurt. My mouth was dry, my skin clammy. David was there, eyes red, voice soft. He told me there had been a complication, something with my kidney, that they had to operate. I didn't believe him. Not when I saw the ring was gone. Not when he wouldn't meet my eyes. Not when he whispered her name like it was a prayer. Barbara. He gave her my kidney. The one thing I never offered. The one part of me I didn't know how to give. And he took it anyway. He told me it was love. I told him to get out, and he did. The second time I opened my eyes, I wasn't in that sterile room. I wasn't hooked up to machines. I wasn't stitched up or drugged or aching. I was in my bed. Our bed. The morning light spilled through the thin curtains like a memory. I could smell burnt toast from the kitchen. I could hear his off-key humming. For a second, just one, I thought maybe the pain had been a dream. Maybe the betrayal, the surgery, Barbara, all of it, was just a nightmare stitched together by exhaustion and fear. Then I saw the calendar. June 12th, 2020. 5 years before the betrayal. 5 years before David stole from me. 5 years before I learned what he was truly capable of. I sat there frozen, staring at the numbers until his voice came floating in from the hallway. Morning, sleepyhead. Hope you're hungry. He walked in, grinning, holding a tray with eggs, 2 slices of black toast, and a mug of coffee that had probably sat too long on the burner. It was everything I remembered and everything I hated. That stupid smile, that careless charm, that boyish laugh. I stared at him like he was a ghost. Because he was. The man standing in front of me hadn't hurt me yet. But he would. He hadn't stolen from me yet. But he would. He hadn't chosen Barbara over me yet. But that was coming too. I saw the future every time he looked at me. And still, I smiled. Because now, I had the one thing I didn't have before. Time. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't warn him. I hugged him, tight. He laughed, surprised. Whoa, what's this for? I buried my face in his shoulder. Just grateful, that's all. He kissed the top of my head. Well, you're gonna be even more grateful after this breakfast. I forced myself to eat the rubbery eggs, forced myself to sip the bitter coffee, forced myself to act like everything was normal. Because now, it had to be. The next few days passed like watching a movie I already knew the ending to. His habits, his charm, his flaws, all unfolding on repeat. I listened when he rambled about funding rounds. I helped polish the pitch deck. I laughed at the same jokes I used to adore, but this time every smile I gave him came with a tally mark in my head. One for the lie he was telling me about how Barbara wasn't important. One for the way he stared too long at her profile photo when he thought I wasn't looking. One for the way he slipped out for business meetings and came home with cologne that wasn't mine. I watched it all happen. Again. Only this time I didn't fall apart. I planned. I told myself to wait, to hold back. Because if I moved too soon, he'd vanish. He'd get cautious. He'd change the game. No, I had to let him believe I was still that same girl, soft, supportive, blind with love. He didn't notice a thing. In fact, he seemed more devoted than ever. He started talking about building a company together, this time with real investors. I even caught him sketching our future apartment on the back of a napkin like it was some fairy tale he actually believed in. But I knew better. I knew where that story led. And right on cue, Barbara reappeared. Not in person. Not yet. But in emails, in introductions, in little coincidences he forgot to mention. She was looking to fund new ventures in biotech. She wanted to catch up. She'd heard good things. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I just smiled and said I trusted him. I dressed softer, wore pastels, pulled my hair into styles he used to say made me look angelic. I cooked for him. I whispered things at night that used to be real. He fell harder. And every time he looked at me with those eyes, the ones that used to make me feel safe, all I could see was that hospital bed. The scar, the missing piece. His hands soaked in guilt. He kept promising me forever, and I kept saying yes. But something in me was shifting. Not rage, not even vengeance. Clarity. He was always going to choose her. He was always going to need more than I had. And I was always going to be the one bleeding for it. But not this time. I began documenting everything. Voice memos, email copies, investor pitch notes, medical research. I knew it would escalate. I knew once Barbara got sick again, he'd spiral, and I'd be ready. What surprised me wasn't how easy it was to fool him. What surprised me was how hard it was to lie to myself. There were moments, quiet ones, where I forgot what he'd done. When he'd look at me like I hung the moon, when he'd laugh and trip over his own words trying to impress me, when he'd dance with me in the kitchen at midnight like we didn't have a care in the world, sometimes I'd almost believe it. Almost. But then I'd see Barbara's name on his phone, and I'd remember what love had cost me. Everything. Some nights I'd lie awake beside David, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing, steady and deep like someone at peace. And I'd wonder how it was possible for someone so calm, so content, to carry the capacity for betrayal in his bones. I'd watch the rise and fall of his chest and imagine those same hands, steady, loving, signing paperwork that gave Barbara my kidney. I'd imagine the moment he handed me over, not to death, but to something worse. Irrelevance, disposability. He called me his world, but I knew better. He called me his future. But I remembered the past. And the more I remembered, the more something inside me started to split. I felt like two people. One who loved him still, despite everything, and one who watched every kiss with the knowledge that it would be a knife one day. I smiled when he walked into the room, but my jaw ached from holding in the truth. I laughed at his stories, but my eyes burned from pretending. Was drowning in my own silence. Every time he touched me, I remembered the IV drip. Every time he said, "I'd never hurt you," I remembered the moment I realized he had. I kept telling myself it was just a role, a script, a game I had to play, to win. But somewhere in the pretending, I started to forget where the mask ended and I began. I hated how much I missed who we used to be. I hated how much I still wanted it to be real. I hated that I sometimes caught myself wondering if in this second chance things could turn out differently. But I knew better, because the signs were already there. Barbara's name started appearing more often. Her emails, once casually deleted, now lingered in his inbox. He changed his passwords, something he used to tease me for even bothering with. His tone shifted when he spoke about investor calls. He was hiding again, slipping away again, and the worst part was how familiar it all felt. The first time, it broke me. This time, it hollowed me. There's a unique kind of pain in knowing someone you love is planning to hurt you. Not because they have to, but because they want to, because they believe you'll forgive it, because they think they can get away with it. It was happening again. I could feel it. He started staying out later, canceling dinners, making excuses. That felt too rehearsed. Investor dinner, he'd say, not realizing he'd used that same excuse 2 nights ago. Barbara just needed a few minutes to go over projections, he'd claim, not noticing the faint perfume clinging to his coat. He thought I didn't notice. He thought I was still that same girl. The one who trusted first and asked questions later. He was wrong. But even with all the proof, even with all the planning, even with every ounce of fury boiling beneath my skin, I still cried. Quietly. Alone. In the shower. In the kitchen. In empty parking lots. Because revenge doesn't erase heartbreak. Knowing the truth doesn't make it easier to carry. I missed the version of him I once knew. Or maybe the version I created in my head. I missed the way he used to look at me like I was the only thing that made sense in a world full of chaos. Now he looked at me like I was a checklist. Just one more obstacle to get through before returning. To the woman who had already replaced me once. I tried to convince myself it didn't hurt. That I was beyond it now. That I was cold. Sharp. Untouchable. But lies don't heal wounds. They just silence them for a while, and mine were screaming. Sometimes, I'd go for drives at night, circling the city, not going anywhere, just trying to feel something. Trying to remember who I used to be before love made me stupid. I'd park near the water and sit there for hours, watching the lights flicker across the surface, wondering how I let it get this far. How I ended up loving a man who would gut me open and call it sacrifice. I thought about telling someone. Jesse, maybe. He always had a gut feeling about David, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed time. I needed evidence. I needed to make sure that when I moved with certainty, because this time there would be no recovery, no survival. This time, I wouldn't just lose a kidney. I'd lose myself, again, and I refused to let that happen. So I rehearsed my lines, perfected my role, smiled when he walked in the door with lies on his tongue and Barbara's lipstick on his collar. And every night, before I fell asleep beside him, I whispered the same promise into the dark. Not again. Not this time. Started again with a headache, just a dull throb behind my eyes at first. Nothing alarming. Nothing I hadn't lived through before. I popped 2 pills, told myself it was stress, closed my eyes for a moment, and kept going. But the next day it was worse, sharper, heavier, pulsing behind my temples like a warning bell I didn't want to hear. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, the strange waves of heat and cold that rolled through me in the middle of meetings, the sensation that the ground was never quite still beneath my feet. I knew those signs. I knew them, like an old song stuck on repeat. And when David offered to cook dinner that night, lobster risotto again, just like last time, I smiled so hard it made my jaw ache, because now I was sure he was going to try again. He poured wine, he lit candles, he made small talk like everything was perfect. But I saw the way his eyes flicked to his phone every few minutes, waiting. I saw the way he watched me eat like he was counting down the minutes. I pushed the food around my plate, pretended to drink the wine, excused myself early, with a faint smile and a murmured, "I'm just tired." The moment I closed the bedroom door, I locked it, and I called Jesse. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the company took off and David pushed him out quietly with legal fine print and false promises. But Jesse picked up on the second. "Ring, Pam?" he said, stunned. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm going to be. I need your help." That was the second twist. Not just that David would betray me again, but that this time I had someone watching, someone smart, someone who had nothing to lose and every reason to want the truth exposed. Jesse didn't ask questions. He just said, "Tell me everything." So I did. About the past, about Barbara, about the surgery, the scar, the silence, the second chance I never asked for but somehow got. I told him about the documents I'd found buried in David's files, medical paperwork, insurance authorizations, a signed donor consent form with a forged signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Jesse cursed under his breath. "You think he's going to try it again?" he asked. "I don't think," I said. "I know. We came up with a plan, a way to catch him." I sent Jesse copies of everything, emails, call logs, screenshots, my medical reports, and then we waited. The next day, David brought flowers. "You've been looking pale lately," he said gently, placing them in a vase. "You should go get checked out." I smiled. "I already did." He blinked. "Oh?" "Yeah," clinic said. "I'm anemic. Could be kidney stress." He paled, just a flicker, just a heartbeat of hesitation before he recovered. "Well, we'll figure it out," he said, voice too smooth, too fast. "We always do." Later that night, I heard him on the phone in the hallway, whispering, saying words like timing and procedure and discreet. He didn't know my phone was recording everything from the other side of the door. He didn't know Jesse was already tracing his calls, and when I got up the next morning, my headache gone, my vision clear, I realized something else. He wasn't just willing to do it again. He was confident he could. That's what shattered me more than anything. Not the crime, not the betrayal, but the certainty that I was still weak in his eyes, still disposable, still naive enough to trust him one more time. That was his mistake. Because this time I wasn't the one being hunted. This time I was laying the trap. The night he tried to do it again, the rain fell just like it had 5 years ago. Soft at first, gentle, as if the sky itself was trying to lull me into a false sense of peace. But I knew better. I had taken the call from the clinic earlier that day. The nurse's voice had been careful, hesitant. "We're confirming you'll be arriving tomorrow morning for pre-op?" she asked. "Pre-op?" I echoed, though I already knew what she meant. "Yes, for the scheduled nephrectomy. Dr. Maddox has you slotted for 8 a.m. A kidney removal. My name on the form. A signed consent. All fake." I smiled, but there was steel in my voice. "Actually, I think there's been a mistake." And then I hung up. It was time. That evening, David was in unusually good spirits. He came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. He set the table, lit candles, even wore the watch I gave him years ago, the one he said reminded him of where we started. I sat across from him, calm, patient. Every bite I took felt like bait on a hook. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, reaching across the table for my hand. "Like, peaceful." "Maybe I am," I replied, brushing my thumb over his knuckles. "Feels like something big is finally ending." He smiled, not realizing I wasn't talking about us. After dinner, he suggested a movie. Something soft. Familiar. I excused myself to the bathroom. That's when I found the glass of wine he'd poured for me earlier still half full on the kitchen counter. I'd barely touched it. It was warm now, but he'd been watching it all night like he expected me to finish it. I took the vial from my pocket, the one Jesse had given me. I tilted it just slightly, collecting a sample, sealed it in a tiny tube, and slipped it into my jacket. Evidence. When I returned to the couch, he had already dimmed the lights. "Come sit," he said gently, patting the space beside him. I did. 10 minutes into the film, I feigned dizziness. "My head," I murmured, letting my eyelids flutter. He tensed. "Do you want some water?" I said, barely audible. He stood, walked into the kitchen. He came back with a glass of water and that soft, deceitful smile. "Here, drink this, babe. You'll feel better." I took it. Sipped, waited. "David," I said quietly. "What are you planning?" His hand froze midair. "What do you mean?" I turned my head slowly. "You've been slipping, leaving things out. Phone calls you forgot to delete. Scheduling surgeries with forged signatures. You didn't even try that hard this time." He stared at me, panic inching into his eyes. "Pam, you're not making sense." "I know about the clinic. I know about the pre-op. I know about the fake consent forms. I know you've been working with Barbara's new doctor, Dr. Maddox. I know you've been planning this for weeks." He took a step back. I took one forward. "You know what betrayal feels like the second time, David," I whispered. "It doesn't sting like the first. It doesn't break you. It builds something else. A fire. A fury. And I've been burning quietly since the day you stole from me. You drugged me." His mouth opened, closed. "That's not how it— You stole my kidney." His eyes darted to the door. "You gave it to Barbara." Held up his hands. "She was dying, Pam, she was— And I wasn't? You decided that for me? You cut into me like I was a spare part, like I was a backup battery you could rip open whenever the shiny model started to fail." He dropped the act then. His face went cold. Flat. "I did what I had to do," he said, no emotion in his voice. "You wouldn't have said yes." "That's why people ask, David. That's what consent is." He scoffed. "You think you're so righteous, but you stayed. Even after. You came back. You played house. Don't pretend you're innocent. I didn't come back to love you," I said, my voice steel. "I came back to end you." And then I reached into my jacket and pulled out the USB. He blinked. "What's that?" "Your confession. Your plan. Every email. Every voicemail. The sample from that drink you poured me. Everything you used to try and destroy me. Recorded. Backed up, time-stamped, and already sent to the police. You're bluffing. Am I?" He lunged for me. I stepped back. The door burst open. Jesse walked in, 2 officers behind him. David froze. "You," he hissed at Jesse. Jesse shrugged. "Still got friends in high places. Unlike you." The officers moved forward, cuffed David. Read him his rights, and through it all, he stared at me. "You ruined me," he said, his voice shaking. I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "No," I said. "You ruined yourself. I just turned the lights on." As they led him out into the rain, he shouted one last thing. "You still love me." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I stood there in the doorway, the silence closing, in like a final chapter. I looked at the empty wine glass, the flickering candles, the remnants of a man who once called me his world, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, just silence and peace. The story exploded before the sun rose. By morning, every major outlet had picked it up. Tech founder arrested for attempted organ theft. My name was everywhere. My face in photos I didn't remember posing for. Victim, survivor, whistleblower. They used so many words, so many headlines, but none of them got it right. I wasn't a victim. I was the end of David's story. He tried to call me from holding the next night. I didn't pick up. Not when the screen flashed his name. Not when the reporters waited outside my apartment. Not even when Barbara showed up, eyes wide with panic, voice trembling with fake remorse. She stood at my door, perfectly dressed, like she thought she could charm her way through the fallout. "Pam," she began softly, Can we talk? I looked at her for a long time. Her expensive shoes, her flawless face, her hands, empty now. Because David was behind bars, and the ring she once wore as a promise to their shared secret was gone. There's nothing left to say, I said. David. Didn't mean to. You were both dying, I said, voice calm. But only one of you tried to kill me to live. Her lip trembled. She tried again. Please. He loves you, you know, in his own way. I shut the door before she could finish. That was the last time I saw her. David's trial was fast, public, brutal. The evidence was airtight. Jesse made sure of that. Every email, every forged document, every phone call, every attempt to drug. Me again. We had it all. Even the payment he'd quietly arranged to a surgeon willing to look the other way. He pled guilty halfway through. The courtroom was quiet that day. Just the sound of papers shifting. My breath in my throat. His eyes on me the entire time. I never looked back. He got 12 years. They said he might get out early for good behavior. I didn't care, because he wouldn't come back to the world he left behind. By the time the bars closed around him, I had already built something better. I turned the scandal into a platform. Started a foundation for women exploited in medical crimes, those who were manipulated, gaslit, silenced. I gave them names, resources, protection. I used my voice to amplify theirs. The media loved it. The donations poured in. I was no longer the girl he left bleeding in a hospital bed. I was the woman who dismantled him piece by piece and rebuilt something stronger from the rubble. Jesse stayed in the picture. Not romantically. Not at first. He was my anchor through the chaos. Quiet, supportive, never asking for anything in return. He showed up when others walked away, sat with me when the nightmares returned, never asked if I forgave David, never told me I should. He just stayed until one day he didn't have to knock anymore. He already had a key. We didn't rush things. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping kisses in the rain, just two people who had survived the same monster and somehow found something whole in each other's ruins. When he finally held my face in his hands and whispered, "You never needed him to be whole," I believed him. Because I was. I bought a house. A quiet one, by the sea. I planted rosemary by the windows and filled the rooms with light. I cooked again, not for anyone else, just for me. I made dishes I loved. Burned. Toast on purpose sometimes, just to laugh at the memory. I traveled. Spoke on panels. Wrote a book. I signed every copy with the same message. Your body is not currency. Your love is not debt. Your life is your own. Years passed. The scar on my side faded, but I never let it disappear completely. I touched it sometimes. Pressed. My fingers gently against it in the morning, not as a wound, but as a reminder that I lived, that I chose myself, that I made it through. Then one day, I got a letter, no return address, just my name, scrawled in handwriting I could never forget. Inside was a photo. David, thin, pale, sitting on a bench outside the prison hospital, hooked to a dialysis machine, eyes sunken, hands trembling. The irony was so poetic I laughed. No note, no plea. Just the image, a quiet message from karma. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just burned the photo and went on with my day. Because my story didn't end with his. It began with mine. I found peace, not in revenge, but in power. The power. To walk away, to reclaim everything, to never go back. And on the anniversary of the day he took my kidney, I threw a fundraiser in his name. We raised $50,000 that night for patients waiting on transplants. None of them would have to suffer in silence. None of them would be left in a sterile room wondering why someone who said I love you had taken everything from them. They would be heard, helped, healed. That was my justice. That was my ending. And as the last guest left the gala and the lights dimmed, I stood alone in the center of it all, the sound of applause still echoing behind me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't afraid. I was free. And somewhere, in a cold white room with failing kidneys, and no more games to play, David would finally understand what it felt like to need someone who would never come.